Hello and welcome to the first talk of our first ever South Asian Heritage Month. And I'm Anjali, this is Renu, and I hope you enjoy what we're going to talk about this evening, which is the importance of autobiographical work within the arts in order to accurately represent and document our history and experience. So before we begin, both Renu and I will introduce ourselves and just our background and what interested us into this conversation. So as I said, I'm Anjali Chadha, and primarily I am an actor and a writer, and I have been an actor and a writer for over 20 years. And in that time, I've worked on other people's work, I've worked on other people's autobiographical work, because when we talk about autobiographical work, we always automatically think of one person on stage telling their story, but sometimes people tell their stories in the form of a play, which mean multiple characters. And I've also written my own work from an autobiographical point of view, which was the Dateless Wonder, which I did over 12 years ago. But outside of acting and writing, at present, I'm the artistic associate at Tara Arts. And for those of you who don't know Tara Arts, we're based out in Earlsfield, and at 43 years, we are the oldest South Asian theatre company in the country, if not probably outside India in the world. And since I've been working there, my role there is I'm developing other people tell their stories, and I'm developing as a dramaturg. And what interested me in this topic particularly is I've noticed over the last few years in particular that there has been an increase in actors coming to us, talking about wanting to do their own work for many reasons, and that in itself is a really huge conversation. And I'm finding a lot of actors coming to us to want to do their own solo shows. And one of the reasons behind doing their own solo shows is they don't feel that they're getting the parts. There's nothing that's putting a fire in their belly, but also they're not getting any auditions. And so what's happening within that time is that, and what's really surprising, it's more women than men. You know, we rarely get men coming to us saying, I want to write my own solo show. I want to write my own work. It's mainly women. Mm. And when we're talking about solo shows, there are two distinct areas that are happening, which is biographical. And I'm just going to get my I've made some notes of who I'm talking about. But have I gone? Have I disappeared?
No, you're still here.
Oh, good. Can you see me?
I can.
Oh, brilliant, because I've disappeared on mine, but it doesn't matter. So yeah, so what I'm finding is happening is that a lot of people are coming in, sorry, I lost my train of thought. A lot of people are coming in saying, we want to create our own work. And it's split into two ways. They want to play a part of a historical figure or biographically someone else, someone that they wouldn't get a chance to play. And actually the two main ones that we also get are, Princess Sophia Dalip Singh, who was one of the suffragettes, and Noor Inayat Khan, who had a big role in the Second World War. And we're getting actresses wanting to come in and do those biographical work simply because there is no work for them. There is nothing that puts a fire in their belly to go, look, I'm not being cast with roles with gravitas, roles that have, just makes them feel alive. Nobody wants to, go to continuous drama and play the girl that's running away from arranged marriage. And as outdated as a concept as that is, that's still happening today. And then the second part that I'm finding at Tara are people coming in and they want to tell their own stories or their mother's story, which is more autobiographical. Again, for two reasons: they don't feel that they connect to a lot of things they audition for. They don't see themselves on stage. They don't see anything that's coming around. So that's why I thought actually autobiographical work, it seems to be the future, or biographical work seems to be the future. And it's worth discussing why it seems to be a big growing, not market, wrong word, just something that a lot more I'm finding South Asian
actors. It's a trend, isn't it now, I suppose? It's kind of a trend.
It's a trend, or if it's just the result of years of just miscasting, not having parts. But I know that in South Asian actors, and I'm going to say predominantly women, I rarely get men coming in saying we want to write our own work. So I thought that would be really, really interesting, which is, in terms of what we've written, I thought that was the point. And I also find myself, like when I was an actor, people give you their work, and as an actor, you know his shit, you play the truth and you deliver it for the writer, for the audience. But I'm now contributing to the arts in a way, as being a dramaturg and being a developer, in a way I've never done before. I've never kind of done that before. And for me, it's also new territory. So discussing this today, and hopefully with the questions we get, I might learn something that kind of changes my career, but also increases my skill base as well. So that's me, Anjali. And so I just thought I'd leave you to now talk and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Anjali. That's a really lovely introduction. And I just want to kind of, just before I introduce myself, I'm Renu Arora, by the way. Before I go into my story, I just want to say, pick up what you said about learning, because I believe that as an artist, we're always learning. And I actually believe that as an artist, if we're not open to learning, the art kind of stops and it can get stale, it can get stagnant. We've all been in a situation we've just thought to ourselves, well, I'm not open enough. I want to be open. So I think I kind of agree with that. I feel like as artists, we're constantly learning, responding to the situation we find ourselves in, responding to what's happening in the world, like sponges. We're allowing ourselves to be responsive, aren't we? That's what we do. We're vessels to create work from. So my name is Renu Arora, and I am an actor, singer, songwriter, writer, director. I've been working in the arts for about sort of 16, 17 years. And in my career, I've told, like Anjali, so many of other people's stories. I've also told what I would loosely call my own ancestral story in terms of my family's partition story. I did a show which Tamasha was involved in several years ago called The Crossing. And I told my dear grandmother's story because I wanted to immortalize her very beautiful and painful and traumatic story before she passed away. And she passed away sadly 2 years after. And it was a really, really, really interesting experience. Because my motivation for that was just kind of going, well, I need to put this story somewhere, put it on the stage so that my parents can hear. Because I knew that when I was interviewing her, that some of what she was saying, even my parents didn't know. Because as we both know, some of these conversations are not had, are they? You know, after partition, you had the kids to look after, you had a family to look after, you had a job to get, you were displaced. So they just had to survive. So there wasn't the time or the space to go, what happened? There just wasn't. So a lot of these stories just stayed inside, and I felt it was my responsibility as the next generation to kind of to elicit these stories, to almost immortalize it, so that I know that there's something there, and I've got the recording of that forever, you know. And I've also told other people's stories in a verbatim fashion as a director, obviously also as an actor too. And then 3 years ago, I became my own story when I had a very serious accident. I was pulled under a bus, dragged under the wheel on my way home from an acting job. My foot was completely crushed, and I now use walking aids. And I have decorated my crutches. So my mobility is now affected permanently. So that's obviously affected the whole of my life. And so I'm now in the process of telling my own story. I have a series of podcasts that will come out relatively soon called The Burgundy Book. And I've got a brilliant team working with me on those podcasts. I've also been creating a series of lockdown pieces since lockdown happened over the past couple of months. And I've done 2, the third one's coming up, and they've both been on BBC Radio over the past couple of months, which has been really, really nice. So that's where I've been at over the past the accident was 3 years ago. And I'm now telling my own story, and I'm finding that the more I tell it in an artistic medium, or even just on social media, the more people are wanting to listen and kind of going, yeah, me too. I want this kind of authentic, real, truthful conversation. I want more of it. And I'm going, people are hungry for authentic work. They're hungry for authentic tales. They're hungry to see somebody being so real that they can feel their own sense of, their own soul within mine, if that makes sense. But that's a conversation for later, because you have to, as an artist, you have to be ready to tell your story. So to get this conversation going, I thought I'd ask you, Anjali, what does autobiographical work mean to you?
When we say autobiographical, I'm also putting in biographical. I'm also putting in real people's real stories. And for me, what I think is there's three main categories, and that doesn't mean that they're the only categories. There's others, but there's the three main ones, and they overlap. They also shoot off to subcategories. And the three categories I would say in terms of autobiographical work is historical, collective, and individual. So going through these one by one, first of all, historical. We all know at the moment the conversations we're having about empire, about decolonization of the curriculum, about, partition. And when we look at, I take a step back. Myself, Anjali, I am a direct descendant of partition. So my father was 14 or 15 when partition happened. And the course of his life, his family's life, absolutely changed completely. From being born into one of the wealthiest families into Lahore, everything went, And so there is a massive work biographically. Now, Dad, through all the trauma, the PTSD that we tend to not talk about, or we tend to not give that generation credit for. I knew a lot about partition, or I thought, okay, I know Dad's story, I know the Chadha family story, I know all of this, I know the stories of all the relatives that lived there, from the Bhatias to the Ballas to everybody, who became family friends here, that they all lived nearby. And then when the 70th anniversary of partition came along, suddenly there was, there was the documentary by Anita Rani. There's also been work since then about Kavita Puri has done on radio, £3 in my pocket, and then Partition Voices. And then suddenly you think, I don't know anything. From someone who was so adamant, I knew biographically my family history, not just my people's history. So we're talking people from North India, from Punjab, which is where my ancestry is from. I realized I knew a fraction. Now let's take that into biographical and autobiographical work. We know that we have the stories that are part of the Partition Museum. We know we have stories that Kashi House are doing with the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. We know that, what are the other stories? Yeah, so we know that, there's the Manchester Museum here. We know that there's all these stories, what in Kavita Puri's work, we know all of this. And what's really kind of, not sad, but worrying, is we only have a fraction of what we should have. The people have, all the people from my dad's generation, his cousins, his brothers, everyone's gone now, everyone's passed away. And so I know my dad's story, but I didn't know Bol Dayaji's story, I didn't know Vimal Chachaji's story, I didn't know Vade Daddy, my dad's older brother, I didn't know my Vade Daddy's story. I know the family story. And so biographically, the more that we allow people, or we really put weight behind people telling their stories to document them, it is really important. And when we talk about history, we think a GCSE lesson in a school with a really bland teacher, but that's not what history is. History is not about being historical, it's not about academia, it's not about the British Library, it's not about books that are published. We can have a huge say in the arts in terms of our history. We can tell history, we can tell our stories as actors. And there's actually one thing that I want to bring up. And when I did my first project, when I was given my first job to do at Tara, it was for 100 years of suffrage. And I did a project called Food for Thought, where I got 4 actor writers to develop their own pieces. And one of the ladies, actress, Bushra Laskar, she wrote a piece called Rice from My Mother's Hand. Sorry, I'm reading this just for anyone who's watching, but as I'm dyslexic, I need to sometimes have visual aids. And it was the story of Iram, Chanu, Sharmila. Now, for those who don't know that, she was a political prisoner, and she is an Indian woman, and she, at 16 years, was the longest woman to go on hunger strike at 16 years. And when you hear that story, you're like, sorry, why have I not heard about her? There's this woman in India who's done this, and it's an amazing story. And Bushra wanted to tell this story because she felt a connection in terms of autobiography, her people, where she comes from. It's the story of her own. You know, so when we talk about autobiographical, we're also talking culturally of having some sort of sense of racial, religious, just any cultural identity. And then we started researching it, and we realized how very, very little there is written about this woman. The odd article here, the odd interview, but there's nothing. And that's when we decided to write the piece from her companion, her jailer, because being on hunger strike, she would have needed someone with her all the time. And so a lot of what we were said, and Bushra did her homework, especially working with me, but a lot of it was educated guesses. When we're looking at Sophia Dilip Singh, when we're looking at Noor Inayat Khan, there's lots written by them, but in terms of autobiographical, when you're looking at the actors who really want to immortalize them, they really want to play them on the stage, they want to do a one person showing up to Edinburgh and go, look what I can do. I'm fed up of watching white women in Jane Eyre and period pieces when I want to play these, you know, and you see the passion, and when I'm passionate, I wave my hands around. And there isn't a lot there. And so we do what we do as artists. We make educated guesses, we do our research, we kind of think, okay, this is not there. And I don't ever want that again from this period of time, this generation of women who are working, that in 40, 50 years time, my grandniece decides that she wants to be an actor and she wants to do a piece on the life of someone who's around today, and there isn't anything there. They just know, they've got a rough Wikipedia page, and they're having to make educated guesses to their voices, their struggles, what it was like, knowing if it's true or not. So in terms of biographical, that's why I think it's really, really important that stories are told, but also stories are told so then the history books aren't skewed with the people who, because also stories and autobiographical stories, it's the person who's asking, it's their interest. Now, if someone's doing lockdown pieces, now right now, in 40, 50 years time, what's happened now will be a significant point in history, how the world coped.
Right. Yes.
This will be seen how we see the Spanish flu, how we see the Black Death, how's it done. If someone's doing a series of like lockdown monologues, but I'm not visible to them, I'm not visible as an artist, then those stories that go on in 40, 50 years time won't include what happened to me, won't include you, won't include any other of my South Asian sisters or brothers. And that's why it's really, really important. And I've talked really long about the first.
Well, that's interesting. Sorry.
Yeah,
that's interesting because that's one of the reasons why I created my 2 lockdown pieces, The Third Yet to Come, because I wanted to make pieces actually this time without the South Asian narrative at its heart. Because whilst we've all got our own, you know, as people, we're different and we're similar in so many ways, aren't we? And to add to your brilliant answer just there, I think there's also the cultural element of autobiographical work, which I can think is included in the historical element, right? So I feel like when we're making work, and there is a question to be had in the sense, especially for us artists, South Asian artists, is there somebody said to me a few months ago around the Burgundy book, they said, they said, because obviously the Burgundy book, which I'll get to more tomorrow, because I talk on trauma tomorrow, Asian people don't necessarily talk very much about trauma, do they, in our community? And obviously my work, the Burgundy book, is very much around trauma. But what I'm very aware of, telling stories around big things that have happened both in my career before the accident and now in my own work, is that the trauma itself is rarely the story. It's everything around it that becomes the story, right? It's the nuance, it's the what happens when you get into a cab, when you go to the hospital, it's what did your day look like before the trauma happened? What does your day look like now? What made you tick before? Who were you before it happened? What were you doing just before the trauma actually happened? And to me, that's the actual story. That's the bulk of the story. And somebody said to me a few months ago, you know, is there because South Asian people don't talk much about trauma, is there a thread weaving through your work, the Burgundy Book podcast, around this? And actually there isn't there? No, there isn't. And that was a conscious choice, and I've thought about it quite a lot since then, because I thought, okay, yes, I can insert it, but it would be so false, because to me my work, the reason why the lockdown pieces thankfully worked when they were on radio last month, is because they're so broad, because they didn't have a South Asian slant. They didn't have a South Asian flavor. They just had a personal flavor. So people of all walks of life and backgrounds and heritage could relate to it. And I made that a conscious choice. I've made South Asian work in the past, so much of it, as an actor, as a director, as a writer. But this time I made a very conscious decision not to have a South Asian narrative weaving through this. I mean, I am, as you know, going on to the BBC Asian Network on Tuesday to talk about trauma in the Asian community, but you've got something to say and I can see.
Yeah, right. Three things, and you know where I stand on all of this. You know, when we say South Asian, what we mean is bad. That's what we mean. That's what it means. When people say, "Oh, I don't want to play Asian parts," what they mean is boring and bad. That's not the case. You know, you can still play something in a South Asian family or setting and still be interesting. But if you write about the trauma accurately, it will. You know, when I wrote The Dateless Wonder, it was set completely Pakka Punjabi wedding, but there were so many people that identified in it, but it depends how you write about it. And when we say things like Asian people don't talk about trauma, we don't talk about this, I just think sometimes that's a lazy way of going, I'm not going to look into this. Because living in where my mum lives in Hounslow, I actually disagree with that. I think actually people do talk about trauma, but it's how you identify trauma. I can tell you a lot of things about from everyone that lives here, from the Coslers next door to, oh God, I'm giving away where I live. You know, I can tell you a lot when we meet on the street and we talk. I think sometimes certain narratives have been put out there and they're very convenient to control what work goes out there. It's very easy to go, oh, well, you know, there were three things that I wanted to ask what you were saying, and we might be going off topic here, which is the danger of one person representing a whole community. So when we go, oh, I don't want to make it an Asian narrative, what does that mean? In terms of autobiography, because I hear that a lot when people come in and go, oh, I don't want to make it an Asian piece. What do you mean? You're an individual. And I was, Nikesh Shukla wrote something a couple of weeks ago, and it was about when he was trying to pitch a piece of work. And what had happened was he got told, oh, we've already got our Asian piece. And he just went, but we're all different people. You know, just because you've got your Asian piece, it doesn't mean it's going to be the same as mine. And there was a plethora of writers. It didn't come as a surprise to anybody, saying that they've gone to agents as a writer and said, oh, here's my work, would you represent me? Only to hear, oh, well, we've already got one black writer on our books. We've already got one Asian writer. And so I feel that when we give credence to that Asian story, when we give credence, we buy in and we support that narrative, I feel. It's a wider discussion, not for today.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I feel we give into that. And when I challenge people, I say, what do you mean about Asian? And we start dissecting, it's almost like this learned behavior to just say it without thinking about it and what it means and the dangers of it. Because we don't have one narrative that represents all, and that's the danger of it with our autobiographical work, where, you know, they're a small conglomerate of narratives, which are forced marriage, which is, they all come down to big bad brown people with their big bad brown culture and their big bad brown men, and they're our narratives. But actually it is, we don't have to have Asian cancer. We can have cancer, we can have accidents, we can have this, we can have that. But just because you don't have the character as specifically South Asian, it does not mean that it's not a South Asian story. When we say South Asian, we mean bad. That's what we mean.
So to clarify that, you're absolutely right. This obviously mine is a South Asian story because I'm a South Asian woman who had an accident that now has a disability, and you know, all of that is South Asian. I suppose what I was trying to say was that the trauma that I experienced of the accident, although it sits within a South Asian context, that context, I haven't chosen to bring that into the conversation too much. And that's a choice. That's what I meant. Of course it's a South Asian story because I'm South Asian. That's where all of our marketing and publicity is going as well. So, you know, I'm very proud of that fact.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of it in, but there's not necessarily too much of the cultural stuff around it that binds the story. Because I wanted to make this around, because actually, I know we're going off on a tangent and I'll say more about this tomorrow, but after the accident, as an artist, I tried to find an artistic response to what I'd been through that was bite-sized, that was nuanced, that was gentle, that wouldn't frazzle my already frazzled senses after what had
Yeah.
just happened.
Mm-hmm.
That was culturally appropriate, but more than that, but something that I could just digest and find a sense of hope and home in their words. I couldn't find anything. I found loads of books, but I couldn't find a kind of a podcast or a show that I could dip in and out of. There was nothing that I kind of felt I could immerse my spirit in. So my reason for creating the Burgundy book, sort of when I had the idea 2 years ago, was to make the thing that I knew would have been fabulous for me 3 years ago when I had the accident, you know?
Yeah, so I'm going to throw a question at you, and it's going back to the original one you asked me. Now, having said that, so in terms of not just yourself, because I know that you've worked with other people on their real life stories, what does autobiographical work mean to you? Or have you just answered that and I haven't realised that?
I think I have, but I can elaborate a bit. So yeah, so I think it does mean all of the things that you mentioned, or the cultural aspect is there too. And I think for me, there's also, I have to also ask myself, what kind of medium do I want to tell my story or other people's stories? And I don't know whether you're referring to me telling other people's stories or whether you're referring to
because I know
my
that
own.
you did some work where you were telling other women's stories.
Women of Hope, yeah, I
Women
can
of
talk a little
Hope.
bit about
And
that.
so
Okay.
when you're looking at autobiographical work, we're necessarily looking at actors telling their own stories. However, there are playwrights who write autobiographical work, and suddenly they have to hand it over to a director, then they have to hand that over to an actor, and suddenly, you know, my fear is it gets changed, it gets diluted, sometimes it gets bastardized, suddenly it's about everybody else's vision. So what I'd like to ask you, because that really does interest me, that project you did. How important is it when it comes to autobiographical work, and it's someone's autobiographical work, but you are one of the vehicles in which that work is being sort of driven towards an audience? In terms of how does that feel for you, in terms of responsibility, in terms of telling the, you know, we have all these statements when we're in rehearsal, tell the truth, you know, it's like you know, and it's like tell the truth of the moment, and all of this that comes out, but in reality we're dealing with feelings, not buzzwords. How does it feel when you had someone's words in your hands and you had to develop it? Because then I'll talk from like a dramaturg's point of view, but I'd love to hear what you have to say on that.
Sure, no, I'd love to hear your experience after this, of course. It's massive. It's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's a massive, an enormous responsibility. And on the other hand, it's an enormous privilege.
Yeah.
So there's this, oh my word, they're entrusting me with this enormous part of themselves. And on the other hand, it's like the same, oh wow, they're entrusting me with this enormous part of themselves. So, you know, I think there is that kind of balance to be had. I'll just talk a little bit about, I did a project called Women of Hope many years ago, which again started off as a project within one of the Tamasha Scratch Nights, and then they helped us to get Arts Council funding, and we put the show on and did a bigger production, and Amnesty thankfully came on board and sponsored it. So Women of Hope was a verbatim music theatre piece around domestic violence within minority communities. So we looked at the South Asian diaspora, we looked at the Latin American diaspora, some others too. And so we got testimony from, I think it was 12 women who had experienced domestic violence in all of those refuges. And in the end, we had 20 hours of material to distill down into an hour and a half show. And verbatim theatre, for those that aren't familiar with the term, means that you create the piece of text, the piece of work, from people's real life words. So you can't edit it down. There are some rules, but there is also a lot of artistic license within that. But verbatim means you take someone's words and put them on the stage word for word. That's what verbatim actually means. Verbatim means word for word. So within our 20 hours of testimony, we also wrote 5 songs. The show was called Women of Hope. And my purpose right from the outset of this show was to show these women as hopeful heroines. That's correct now, isn't it? Heroines. Because I didn't want these women to be portrayed on stage as victims. They're survivors, but equally I didn't want to show them as survivors. I wanted to show them as women first and foremost. And like what I was saying to you earlier about the trauma not being the story, it's almost like their experience of domestic violence wasn't the story. That's incidental. What binded these women, although they never met, was the fact that they all had horrific beyond belief experiences of domestic violence.
Yeah.
But they were also women with the same wants and the same loves and the same needs. And we in fact, I remember in 3 of the interviews, because I interviewed all of the women, and in the interviews I made sure that our actors that were playing the parts of these women would also be in the interview. And to me that was really important, to have them with us, so that they were present in every stage of the rehearsal, so that the piece could be almost slightly collaborative.
Yeah.
And I remember in 3 of the conversations, one of the questions I asked the women was something like, what did you do the moment you realized that you were free? And they all said something along the lines of, I went to MAC to buy makeup. In fact, one of them said, I went to Boots to buy mascara. And we thought, that has to be a song. There has to be a piece of music around this, because it was such a beautiful, liberating, almost, that to us was more moving even than some of the horrible stuff that happened, because it was just this beautiful human moment. But we just thought, oh, we're all the same, we're all human, we all want the same things, you know?
But that's
really quite beautiful.
That's what I find autobiographical work. Sometimes it connects. And one of the most beautiful things I think with autobiographical work is when someone's telling their story and you're like, oh my God, that's me. Yes, yes, yes. Oh my God. That's what I meant by when I said historical, collective and individual. Collective, when you're going, oh my God, there's someone out there who's speaking to me, speaking for me. I don't, and it's lovely. It's like when you hear a song and you go, oh my God, did someone come at night and take the contents of my brain out, because you've just said how I'm feeling about this situation at any given time. And it's funny you say that, because when we did Food for Thought, one of the pieces was, again, biographical and autobiographical, where one of the actor writers was telling their mother's story, and at the end of it, exactly what you said, where she finishes, where she kind of stands there and she, with a Gujarati accent, just goes, and now when I go to Lidl's, and she says Lidl's with, oh, it's cute, like she said Lidl's, and she went Lidl's, she goes, I walk down the alcohol aisle because I can. And that was it. And you know what? You needed nothing else. Anyone in the audience who's ever been through something where as soon as you're out of it, you need to do something to just feel human again. There was no explanation needed. There was it was just, I walk down the alcohol aisle because I can. And that was it. And it said all it needed to say about freedom. It said all it said about recovery. It said all it said. And that's when sometimes the most powerful things about autobiographical tales, when everyone in the room just goes, that's a human story and I connect with that.
Yes, you are absolutely right, 100%. And it's that kind of idiosyncraticness. Go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say to you, and sorry I interrupt you, just to let everyone know, we talk for hours and we interrupt each other all the time in real life when we're having our 4-hour rants.
But we're both dyslexic as well, so.
And I have to say things when I think about them. Yeah, but your pieces, your lockdown pieces, and I want to talk about your lockdown, because I feel that there are writers and actors and people who are viewing this now, and I think it's really important for them to hear your story, not just me blundering on about my work at Tara, but I wanted them to hear about you. So you at present are writing from an autobiographical point of view, and one of your pieces was on BBC Radio. Two of them. Well, I'm talking about the first one when it first happened.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So when the first one happened, what really I think was brilliant was it received such a huge response. So many people phoned up that they played it again the second night. And off the back of that, then your second piece got played because of the strength. And I just want you to talk about it. I don't have a question. I love hearing you talk about it, but there's people who are watching, and I think it's very important for them to hear about when you write your own story, outside of culture and everything, it's about your story connecting with another person who's been through a similar situation. And I really want you to talk about that.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that lovely introduction. That's really kind. The first piece, I mean, we can put the links for people that haven't heard the pieces if they want to hear the pieces when we finish the conversation, or in the chat later on. So the first piece is called When the Curtain Came Down. Now, the piece is based on the fact that for me, the curtain came down on my world metaphorically 3 years ago. That's the way I see the accident. Because, I mean, there's so many things I could say here, which some of them I'll say more tomorrow in tomorrow's talk about trauma. But after any trauma, there's always a before and an after. Always. There's always a kind of a breakage in the psyche. Forget the injuries that happen. Let me forget, as in, like, in addition to the injuries that happen, there's always a breakage in the psyche, in the spirit, in the emotional self as well. So I felt like, almost like a stage curtain fell on my world on the 29th of March 2017, which was the day of the accident. And so the 29th of March being the anniversary sat right in the middle of our lockdown. It was 4 weeks after our lockdown. And since the accidents happened, the second and the third, first, second, and third, obviously the third has just gone, anniversary, I've always wanted to mark the anniversary with something special. On the first anniversary, I was still dealing with the injuries and a lot of the physical fallout and the emotional fallout from that. So I wasn't in a space to create. Obviously now 2 years have elapsed and I've done so much of that, of the creation. And so I wanted to create something that would mark the anniversary, but I couldn't ignore the fact that the anniversary sat right in the middle of lockdown. So it kind of made sense to write a piece then that brought the lockdown into the piece, because also, as we all know as artists, the stage curtain across the world fell, didn't it? Sort of, I can't remember. I think it was the week before the 29th of March. Just as we'd eased into lockdown, the Broadway curtains fell, the West End curtains fell. Maybe someone in the chat can give me the exact dates, I can't remember. So for me, when the curtain came down, is both my curtain coming down 3 years ago and the stage curtains coming down in March, and how my experience sits within the wider context. Because a lot of people have said to me when lockdown happened, you're in quite a unique position because you've had essentially 3 years of lockdown, which essentially I'd had. You know, I'd done the grieving for the life that was. I'd done all that, which people are now doing for their pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown life. I'd done all that already. So for me, creating a new normal, I had done that already. You know, so I felt very much like, again, it comes back to the responsibility thing that you mentioned earlier, Anjali. I felt like I had a responsibility to speak about my story, the anniversary, but the story within the lockdown, from quite a unique perspective, I felt, as someone that's already had 3 years of lockdown, done so much of that processing and grieving, found a new normal, working with a new normal, and come to a sense of peace with it. So that was the motivation for the first piece. And the second piece is called 1095 Days. And that's how long I've been in lockdown for, 1095 days. Well, a potential lockdown.
Yeah.
And so that piece was really more about how I wanted to speak to the so many people who are in the vulnerable category within the pandemic, because there's, I don't know how many, few million, so 1.8 million people who are in the box of being vulnerable, the shielding category within the current pandemic. And I was in that, I've been in that box too, because the accident has meant that I am now vulnerable health-wise. So I wanted to speak to those people, but I also wanted to speak to the generalized anxiety that we have all had as people over the past 4 months, in terms of the fear of opening the bread, the fear of opening the letters. You know, inside our bread is a meal, but outside of it, is it something horrible? You know, what are we touching? It's a scary thing. So I wanted to speak around that, again, from my own perspective as somebody who is in the vulnerable category, and then moving on through the piece to how I have come to a sense of not just peace, but a sense of a friend of mine told me a brilliant quote, I think day before yesterday, by B.K. Iyengar, who's the founder of Iyengar Yoga, who said, I think it was something like, the journey is not evolution, but involution. I thought, oh, it's a brilliant word. I've never heard that before. And I thought, yeah, so that's really what the piece is about, is how we not evolve, but I suppose evolve, if that's a word, I've just made it up. How we go inside and we find our sense of strength and our sense of surrender, and we find our new normal once something massive has pulled the rug from under our world, which of course I went through 3 years ago, but the world is going through now.
Yeah. But how did you feel when the radio station rang you up and went, what you had to say, your autobiographical and the importance of it had resonated, that they were just inundated with, you know, phone calls to a point where they were like, right, we're gonna play this again the following night. You know, how did that feel for anyone who wants to do an autobiographical piece of work? There's writing it, and then there's the bit where it suddenly gets released into the world as well.
Yeah.
That scary point. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow.
Yeah, it cemented my, thank you, that's a beautiful question. It cemented my belief that stories inspire stories, that stories are, the bedrock of our society, that we were telling stories before we even had formal education as a human race. Stories bind us, they bond us, they're the place where we go to grow, to learn about ourselves, to find a reflection within. So when the radio station phoned me and they'd said it had such a phenomenal response, they're gonna play it the following night, I was so touched to my heart, actually, so touched, because they'd also told me a lot of people had also phoned in, they texted in, they tweeted in with their comments, and I just thought to myself, my God, people are really hungry for a real human emotional story. And actually the feedback I have had from these stories, in fact, you know, I'm a great believer, when I get feedback, I try to look for the common threads within my feedback, so I know the bits that are working, if that makes sense. And of all of the feedback I've had for these two pieces, one of the things that people have consistently said, and actually the presenter, Helen Scott, said this on the radio when she played the first piece and we had the interview live. She said to me, the piece goes straight to the heart. And another friend texted me only a few days ago, said the pieces have touched me to my heart to the point where I can't speak. And I thought, oh, my goodness, I feel so touched, so humbled. You know, obviously I'm pleased in my heart, but more than that, I feel touched and humbled that I've put these stories out there and people are feeling a sense of reflection within themselves, and they've seen a sense of themselves within them. That's what I took from it.
So I know it's a lot of me asking you lots and lots of questions, but
no,
what I want to
I'd love to ask you at some point, but carry on.
Okay, then after that you can ask me one, because
sure.
like I'm asking all these questions because they all kind of, you know, they all link into one another. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, this says, as South Asian women, we have a plethora of stories, of experiences, of stuff that's happened. I often don't get to see South Asian women tell stories outside the usual small kind of conglomerate of narratives. I don't often, and I think that's a gatekeeper issue as well, who commissions our stories, who puts our stories on. What I love about your story is it resonates with everyone, as do our stories. And so, you know, although we are talking about trauma tomorrow, I find that as South Asian women, you're always expected to talk about trauma. You're always expected to talk about the South Asian community. You're always expected to angle the story from big bad brown people with their big bad brown culture and their big bad brown men. You're always expected. And so one of the things I wanted to ask, which I've kind of in a roundabout way, look, I've got all my notes of all the questions I wanted to bring along, is why is there such a battle to expand our own voices and stories? And it's not just me, this is a debate point. From what I do at Tara, I want to know. I'd like to have a whole load of creatives in a room and ask, why is it such a battle to expand our own voices and stories? Because when I go up for auditions to, you know, for TV, for drama, for continuous drama, I can't remember the last time I just went, yes, this excites me. It's like, oh, this again. Oh God, this again.
Yeah, you're right.
So that's one of the discussions I'd like us to have. How come? Why are we struggling? And moving forward, what do we need to do? I think it's slightly changing, but not quick enough. And I don't want this to be all about, because there's been so much discussion about gatekeepers, and we know the gatekeepers are the problem. We know the people at the top. We know they're the problem. We know that the commissioning editors are the problem. We know that. We don't need to discuss that. But it's like, why is it a battle? Why is it a battle? And what can we actually do?
How long have we got?
We've got probably 15 minutes before questions, but I think we should go on.
I'm just joking. I know. It's just, it is a battle.
Conversation to have.
It's massive. Obviously, you know, I don't have all the answers. I can just speak from my own experience. Yeah, I mean, I've seen this battle. I suppose my response would be, as you and I have talked about in the past, Anjali, and as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, there's not one narrative within any culture. There are similarities and there are differences. And like I was mentioning before about, the trauma's not the story and what binded these women in terms of the makeup, we've all got different idiosyncratic elements that make up our own individual world, whatever our cultural background. And I think, part of me thinks, well, that's a broad question because it's not just about the South Asian diaspora, it's across the board. I think human beings have a tendency to box things, to generalize. Well, that goes in that box and that neatly fits in that box and that one goes in the one over there. I think it's broader than simply the South Asian diaspora. I think it's bigger than that. I know there's more work out there, of course, in the mainstream about other cultural backgrounds, but I think the question is broader than ours because I think it's really implicit in our human nature to compartmentalize certain narratives. That narrative belongs to that diaspora or that particular cultural background of people. Which of course it doesn't. As you and I both know, we're both Punjabi and we both have very different backgrounds and we both have very different stories to tell. And I think that's the beauty of humans. So for me, it's a human question about the fact that we, you and I might have been to the same school. We haven't been because I'm from Wales, but if we had done, we might have been to the same school, but we would have had very different experiences within that. It's like when people say, two siblings grew up in the same household. One ends up with bipolar and the other one ends up going to Cambridge and having 2 PhDs. Why has one become so successful in the eyes of the outside world, and the other one ends up with a very severe mental health problem? Two people can be brought up in the same household but have very different childhoods, which of course we know. So I think it's a human question, and it's about telling a human story as opposed to telling, obviously the South Asian stories are within that, but I think it's more a human question. How do we tell our own stories? Why is there potentially, as you say, a lack of idiosyncratic stories in the world, and how do we find ways to tell our own personal story? That's my sense for what it's worth.
What I find is when I'm doing my writers groups, and in particular my ladies writers group, the stories are so different and they're so diverse and they suit the writer and their personality and their sassiness or their confidence or their lack of confidence and all these things, and they're different. And then I look at widestream TV and I look at when they're doing their monologue competitions and their writers and all of this, and I think, shame on you. Shame on you. You have no idea what you're missing out on. When you have a distinct idea in your head what makes an Asian story, and we've all been on the receiving end of that. Let me give you a story where when I wrote The Dateless Wonder and I sent it out, I got some horrific responses back, but not once was it to do with the quality of my writing. Not once was it to do with me not shaping the piece well. They were all to do with the cultural narrative. And one lady, she said, would you give me a call? So I thought, oh, she wants to put my work on. As actors, we're like, mum, close the door and I'm ready to go. And what she said to me was, oh, you failed to address the subject of arranged marriages. And so I said to her, but my piece isn't about arranged marriages. And to which she replied, well, don't you think it should be? And you stand there and go, no, that's not what it's about. But in her head, that's what she thought Asian women should write about, or write about big bad brown people with their big bad brown culture. That's what she should write about. And when people like her and people on TV, theatre, publishing, whatever, I think, shame on you, because if you saw even half the work, all of the work I do at Tara, that I've developed, and the ladies do, let me repeat that, the ladies do, my God, you would, and we're developing them now for Scream, and and not one of them is similar, not one of them is the same. And sometimes what I want to say is, can someone drop a few million quid into my lap? Because what I want to say is to all these people is, you don't want the work, shame on you. I'll have it, I'll develop it, I'll put it on, I'll do it. And suddenly you get angry and angry. It's like, BBC, you don't want it? stuff you. You are losing out on some great voices. And that's why our autobiographical tells. And it's not good enough to keep going, well, put it on. What with shirt buttons? People need paying. You know, and then that puts our work into, it's always fringe, it's always a bit free, it's always a bit cutting corners, it's always a bit cheap. You know, it's not good enough to always keep saying, oh, well, we need to tell and put our own stories out there. What with? Why, you know, to go and put a play out on stage, you've got to pay the actors. You've got to pay the director, you've got to pay marketing, you've got to pay the lighting, you've got to pay the technician, you've got to hire the van, you've got to pay the set designers. Who do you do that to? And so you end up with shows where people scrabble and they kind of put them together. And I think our stories are worth more than being just kind of, do you know, I'm trying to think of the English word, but I can't. I can only think of it in Punjabi, but it's like, you know, kind of, kuch puch, it's kind of just put together and put on, and we deserve to have that professional outfit. So when I hear people go, oh, but just write our own stories and put them on, I always go, what with? Shirt buttons. There was something this week that said we are 3 times more likely to be rejected for funding. It was on Twitter,
and that's interesting.
Now I'm going to look it up. Because I don't want to, sorry. What I don't want to do is say something and it be wrong. So I'm going to clarify in tomorrow's show. But we're more likely to take funding. So it's not good enough to keep going. We'll put it on yourself. I don't
that's interesting because I've had the opposite experience. I've had quite a lot of funding through my life from Arts Council, and I know that they've often kind of said to me that it's helpful that you're South Asian because it's actually helpful within our, you know. I know that I've ticked a box actually, which doesn't bother me because it's kind of helped me. Yeah. I know that's true, but I've also seen the other side of it, and I also saw the newsletter the other day that came out from Darren Henley because they've just reopened their project grants, and they're putting a lot of emphasis on people with protected characteristics, people with disabilities, people from the minority groups as well. So I'm really hoping that change starts to happen. I really am.
I mean, I'm going to be really honest. The Arts Council have been good with me. They've been good with me.
Yes, I know. Yes.
You know, the Dateless Wonder was good. The reason I'm at, Tara is because develop your own creative practice. So that's brilliant. Yes. But the reality is, not everybody gets funding. So this isn't a criticism about the Arts Council. I have no.
Sorry, I didn't mean that. I was just trying.
At all. But what I don't like is when it comes to our individual voices, when people hear, oh, just do it yourself, you know, 1,000 of us can't apply for funding and get it. We need other people, we need other theatres and venues and telecompanies to commission our work.
Especially television companies.
Especially television companies. Because they can't. But I want to find out, but yes, we are more likely to be, but then again, you know, funding also comes to how good you are at filling out forms. That's also, you know, which I am, you know, and you are, you know, we know what we're doing. But if you're someone who's just started out and you're trying to do your own work, how do you fill out a form? You know, how do you do that? They're so hard to fill out. And so
I started off years ago when the Arts Council had the scheme where they would pair you up with a relationship manager. So when I started
that's
out,
why I got mine. I had Ian Remington, brilliant man. He literally, if the way he did it, I would, by the time I left, and I didn't want to, I could have started my own theatre company. And those days have to come back, you know, where you have a relationship manager. If we want to see more of our own work, if we want new, there should be loads of us. There should be more South Asian theatre companies coming through, kicking our ass. We should be worried. As Tara, we should be going, oh my God. I really want, because I don't fear, not competition, but I don't fear more of us. I want the new kids to come out and kick our ass and go, listen, you oldies, this is where it's at, this is the work we're saying. And it just increases productivity for everybody. You know,
can I just say, because I've just seen a question about dyslexia on the chat from Sanjay, who we both know. Just to very quickly, I'm so sorry I've cut you off. Just to very quickly say about the dyslexia thing, I'm also dyslexic. I know you are too, Anjali. And there is specific dyslexia help at the Arts Council for filling out forms. I've had it a lot, and I'm having it again, you know, when we apply for the Burgundy book. So there is a lot of help available. If you are dyslexic, somebody will help you and translate your ideas into into words and, you know, help you with that.
Yeah.
Do you want to carry on?
Yeah. So my point was, when it comes to autobiographical work and why it's important, I'm fed up of always hearing, put it on yourself, because for a lot of people, that's not the option. And that can't always keep being the go-to answer. At some point, the people that hold the moolah have to kind of start commissioning us. And also, it's the other thing that really, really kind of bugs me is from an audience point of view, when people go, oh, I never ever see myself or work I'm interested in. Well, write something. Well, why should he? Why should good old Akash Patel, sat in Leicester, who likes to go to watch a bit of theatre? What a rude thing to say to someone. Oh, well, if you want to see yourself represented, write it yourself. And I think sometimes these answers need to be challenged. What now needs to be done is to go to the companies and go, what are you doing? Why aren't you, you know, we'll say to an audience member, what are you doing to see your own shows? We'll flip it around and go, well, what are you doing to commission those shows? It's not good enough to keep saying, write it yourself, put it on yourself. At some point, it has to be very, very different.
Yes, I agree with you. And I've heard that question in the context of other artists. So I think in the context of other artists, that's okay. Because I think a lot of, you know, for us as an artistic community, it is a very good thing to be as productive as we can be, to make our own work. I mean, I've, like you, have made a huge amount in my career, and I enjoy being entrepreneurial and making my own work and being, you know, kind of a leader in that sense. It makes me feel artistically fulfilled, as well as being an actor and a singer and all the rest of it. So I think in the context of an artistic community, I think people do say that, don't they? Make your own work. But I think you can't say that to an audience member, obviously.
Or you can't keep saying it, because it's taking the responsibility away from the gatekeepers, or it's lightening the load of the gatekeepers, because right now they have a huge, heavy burden on their shoulders, and rightly so, but it's taking the responsibility away. And I know that another thing with us is we're all meant to think the same. And I know that there are people out there who will agree with my stance, and there are people out there that won't agree with our stance. But until we're seen as not a thing, an entity, a culture, you know, we're seen as individual human beings, that's a long way to change things. When you walk into rooms, you walk into story rooms, what's really happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree with that. And I think you're right. Our authentic, idiosyncratic, interesting narrative and voice needs to be heard more. Exactly. I completely agree with you.
Anyway, we've been talking for an hour, and I've still got a couple more questions. You know me. Look, I did prep for this. I did prep for this very well. So I'm just gonna. We've been sent through.
There are some questions that have come through. Before we do, though, I just have a couple of questions for you. If we've got sort of 10 more minutes.
Okay, we can.
Maybe.
Okay.
I want to hear about the Dateless Wonder, but before I get to that, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, when you were introducing yourself, how your work as a dramaturg, your recent work as a dramaturg, has now developed you and as an artist, and how you're deepening your practice generally as an artist through your dramaturgy work. So I'm interested in how your dramaturg work has developed you as an artist, what you've learned, and how you feel like you've deepened as an artist. Part one. And part two, and I'll remember them if you can't remember them. Part two. And part two of the question is, what did I want to ask? When you get people coming into your office at Tara and saying, I have a great story to tell, whether it's their own personal story, and we can elaborate on this tomorrow, or it's their grandmother's or a person in history, how do you work with that person?
Okay.
There's two parts to this question.
So to answer your question, I've been working with autobiographical work from a dramaturg and developer's point of view. And I'm going to answer the first one, because the second one, I can't answer it without going into what we're going to talk about with trauma and stuff. So the first question is, how's it changed me? First of all, it's humbled me deeply, because when we're doing writers groups, a lot of people want to write about something that's happened to them. And when we say South Asian women are something, we automatically think something negative. Not necessarily at all. And so the fact that you're being allowed into someone's world, someone's personal world, someone's personal experience, is not just a chit chat you're having over a cocktail. It's something very important. And there's a trust in you to go, right, okay, this is your story. I want to help you develop it, and I want to tell you I want you to tell your story the best way I can. And sometimes I don't always agree with, especially when it's portraying us always as bad people, the Asian community as like, you know, negative. But it's about telling that story. I never want to be that woman who, when you fail to address the subject of arranged marriages, I never want to be that woman. If there's one thing that I came from it, is I want to be the person to go, it's your story. This happened to you. I respect that. You know, and let's develop it and let's do that. And you'll be surprised, but when you're looking, very rarely do I get the forced marriage, arranged marriage, this, that, the other. Rarely, because if you don't set up that environment where you've prejudged the women in the room and they can write about what they want, they write about everything just like any other woman does. And so what it's changed me, it certainly humbled me. It certainly made me more militant about when people go, oh, there aren't that many good Asian writers out there or actors, or these are only the stories we get in, we don't get any other stories. It's made me go, actually, I can tell you, you're talking a load of twaddle. You know, sorry, I didn't want to swear there, but you're talking a load of twaddle. That is not true. That is not true in the slightest. There are so many people out there with so many great autobiographical tales, so many tales to tell from their family, and we need to be, now we've got to be solidifying them. So in 100 years' time, when people look back on certain points in time, our stories are included. They are not whitewashed. They are not you know, the modern equivalent of colonized. We are there as valid human beings, and it's really solidified how politically I feel about this, how motivated I feel about this. So that's how that's changed. In terms of when someone comes in, can I answer that tomorrow? Because
you can, I'm aware. Yeah,
I can't answer without a particular situation that happened that we spoke about when someone started talking and I suddenly realized very quickly this shouldn't be happening, because writing isn't, you know, dramaturgy isn't the same thing as a counsellor. So
sure.
I want to,
in that case,
tomorrow, I will say, right, this is part 2.
Sure, of course. In that case, can you say a little bit to our audience about the Dateless Wonder? Because I've actually read, as you know, bits of your work, Dateless Wonder and other pieces too, and I think you are a very, very sparky writer. You write dialogue. It's explosive. It's funny, it's explosive, it's sparky, and I think it's like holding a sparkler. Going, oh, my hand's about to burn. It's great. So can you say a little bit about that, please?
Okay, so basically, this was the Dateless Wonder. I started writing the Dateless Wonder in 2005, and I wrote it professionally because there wasn't a lot of options left. I wasn't getting very many auditions, and it's not always me. This is happening to a lot of South Asian actors. 2005, you know, that was what, 15 years ago. So you know, just coming out of drama school, you've kind of, you know, you go to college at 18, come out at 21, you know, you do all of that, and suddenly you give it a year, you give it there's nothing happening. And it's like, this isn't the rest of my life. I'm not sitting on my backside unemployed. This is too much. So I wrote the Dateless Wonder simply because I had to do something. And I was fortunate at that time that I was one of the regular cast members of Little Britain. So when I mean regular, the people that were doing all the subsidiary characters, there were some that were like Ruth Jones and Anthony Head, who were well known, but there was quite a few of us who did all the other stuff. And I remember talking to both Matt and David, and they said that Little Britain was their last chance, where if it hadn't have happened, they probably would have walked away, whether they did or not. And so this was their last chance saloon. Ruth Jones had just started Gavin and Stacey, whether writing it or whether doing it, I don't know. But it was do your own work, do your own work. So that was the advice given. So I wrote the Dateless Wonder, and it was very biographical. I have great memories of my childhood, of going to weddings, to munnans, to satsangs, to kirtans, to events, everything. And when I just come out of university, it was a friend's wedding. And until then, I had never been to a white English church Christian wedding before. Why would I? You know, all my family and friends were Punjabi, or my parents' family and friends were Punjabi. So I'd only ever been to Punjabi weddings. So I'd never even been to a Muslim wedding. I've never been to a nikah before. I went the year after a school friend got married, but why would you go? And I didn't know what to expect. And I went, and it was the most bonkers wedding, like any wedding is. And I realised that why do we separate? Well, it was the same thing. It was the same bitchy aunties, drunk uncles, you know, all the aunts going, well, are you courting yet? You'll be you next. Why? Everything. So I wrote The Dateless Wonder, and everything that happens at the English wedding happens at the Punjabi events. I kept it equal on each, whether they happened at the same time or happened at different parts. And so I wrote it. And as soon as I read it, I knew I had something special. And one of the things, if you go to my website, is I got great reviews and great audience feedback when I eventually put it on. And so I knew I had something special. And then I started sending it off. And the responses I got, I still cry today. The arranged marriage was one. I remember someone saying to me, well, I somehow find it hard to believe being South Asian, she wouldn't have been in an arranged marriage. I got that. I got, well, if she didn't have to have an arranged marriage, why is her love interest Asian? Why isn't she just, why would she not go with a white man? You know, why would he not be her love interest? Just loads of racist, microaggressive crap. And normally when I tell this story, I use a lot more swearing because I'm so angry. And then eventually a copy landed on the desk of Salima Khanum, who was the programming officer at the Watermans. And if you've heard any of the talks recently with Pravesh Kumar, Amit Jannah, anyone, the Watermans has been very, very prevalent in supporting South Asian art. And Salima Khanum is also another argument why gatekeepers need to change, and they need to be from a South Asian background or a black background or a more diverse background. So she helped me produce it and put it on, and it went everywhere. And even after it done, I tried to kind of change it into a kind of this, you know, cold feet for TV. But again, all the feedback, if it was down to the quality of my writing, I can take that. I'll go and do an MA in creative writing. If it was to do with me, it was all to do with the narrative. Every no I got was to do with the narrative. And I'm going to be very honest, I have a hate relationship with The Dateless Wonder. I don't, you know, look, you can tell I get upset about it. By the time a company, Hat-Trick, were interested, I'd lost all my confidence because I was like, I don't get it. Have I developed dementia? All I'm getting is a load of white people telling me that my memories are wrong. My life is wrong. It's autobiographical. It's wrong. I'm being told, but why isn't she doing this? Why isn't she doing that? And by the time they gave me the opportunity to write the screenplay, I had no confidence left. I was second guessing everything, going, well, should I bring more of her best friend Stacey in because she's white, so that makes it less Asian? And you know, when you get somewhere, there was no way, because that initial freedom or flow of I'm writing something had gone. And yes, I self-published it. It's on Amazon, but I've never ever bothered touting it. And I do have a hate relationship. I'm coming back from it since being under the mentorship of Jatinder. And he has been very instrumental in me changing who I am. And I spent a lot of time questioning myself. And there's a longer story. I'm quick going over it now. And this probably is a story in itself. But I actually, after The Dateless Wonder, I left the industry for a while. I went and worked at Heathrow as a personal shopper at World Duty Free for 4 years because I thought, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't spend it. I need to be out of this racist situation. And I went off and became a personal shopper, and I loved it. But the heart of me just didn't. Mera dil nahi lag gaya. I don't know how to say that in English. Mera dil nahi lag gaya. It's like my heart.
How did you get that heart back?
I had an idea for something, and it was something called Dollied, and it was based on women's stories who work at makeup counters at departments, because that's where I worked. I worked at World Duty Free. I was working in the makeup. I was a personal shopper, and it was and so I went to see Jatinder. I was with both ideas. It was that, and I had an idea called the Food Court, and it was based on an old school shopping centre like Elephant and Castle. And you know the food courts where you got the pizza, the spud you like, an old fashioned, and just telling people stories in a food court over a day. You know, and to kind of either film them or do them a lot like Jim Cartwright's 2, where it's only 2 actors but loads of different stories. And so I went in because I just thought, and I told him my idea for the food court just by chance, and this was serendipitous, really. Serendipitous a word or serendipity? I don't know.
It is a word, yes.
Serendipitous, where he just went, actually, I'm programming 100 Years of Suffrage. And he's like, this food court, would you be able to do for women? Would you be able to like get the stories for 4 women and call it food and empowerment? Because one thing for women, food is, especially with women from different cultures other than white, food is very much a part of Italian culture and women, Indian culture and women, food and empowerment. And like actors, we're born to go, yes, I can do it. Yes, I can train 4 actors. Yeah, I can do it. Walked out, went to Earlswood train station and went, what the hell have I agreed? I'm not a dramaturg. What have I done? Oh, like that.
Wow.
And did it with bells and whistles. And then after that, I kept
huge
working for
congratulations.
Tara, but being under the roof of Jatinder changed my life. It changed my confidence.
I wish we had another few
That's
hours.
why
Can you say more about how it's changed you?
Just, I've never had to explain myself. I was never told that my history was wrong, my life was wrong. We talk about work. We talked about when we did the book club live, we talked about everything, because my desk, there's Jatinder's desk, the artistic director's desk, and then there's one desk and there's mine. And literally we'd sit across the office talking all day. And it's the first time where I wasn't constantly told, well, my opinions were wrong and you should be writing about this and you should be thinking about this. It was fantastic. And then one particular thing I do remember, so I'm going to plug my phone, I'm going to plug my thing in because otherwise I'll disappear. I went to see something called Trident Moon, and it was a play at the
Partition.
and it was about partition, and it was set in the back of a truck where it was 3 Muslim women and 3 Hindu and 3 Sikh. I'm going to actually again talk about that tomorrow because I don't want to again say something that's not true. So one of the actors, Geeta Gupta, gave me one. Basically, she said, oh, will you come and see me in this play? And it was like, babe, I'm having one of those months where I don't have the money. I'm really sorry. So I didn't lie. I said, I can't really afford to buy the ticket. And she was like, I'll give you one of my comps. And I was like, are you sure? And she was like, yes. I was like, well, I'm there. I wasn't working at Tara at that point.
Very nice of her.
And I went in, you know, Finborough, it's very small, sat in.
Finborough,
and you know, man spreading, I had a man here like that under someone's armpit, and then the play started, and then it ended, and I haven't got a clue what an hour and a half happened.
Wow!
My heart was in my throat. I was like, oh. And that's a good play, and it was the first time I'd seen my people, and I want to say that my people. I am North Indian. I am Punjabi. My family's lineage comes from Lahore, my people, and the trauma and the story. And it was amazing. And this was the year before the 70th anniversary of partition. And I thought one of the Zone 1 theatres, the National, someone would have picked it up and run with it, with cast as is. The one thing I would say, the cast as is, the cast were amazing, not to change them over with names as certain things do for selling point. And when no one picked it up, I was like, wow. And I personally think as theatre, we should be ashamed of ourselves. I don't think we, I know Trident Moon was on at Tara, but I don't think we, and you know when we say we always look at South Asian theatres. No, we're looking at our national theatre. I'm a British citizen. I pay my tax. That's my national theatre. And I was really shocked how there wasn't, the BBC did, you know, some nice documentaries, and I know that there was some nice things happening, but I was really shocked that our theatre just didn't do anything to tell our stories. And then
especially when it's on the anniversary, you
on
think
the
it would be
anniversary
all over the place.
And I think even the cast were it was such a phenomenal play. Even I thought it would be on, and I hope I would push for it to go on for its 75th, because it's only a year after next. And it was a brilliant play. And then the Hampstead did something a while later, and what was it called, The Line, or Drawing the Line or something.
Yes, I saw it.
And I lost my rag. I was at Tara, and it was like, again, a white man commissions another white man to tell the story of white men. Oh, but you know, it doesn't paint them in a good light. I don't give a flying fish face about it. I don't care.
I do.
Where are my stories? Where are my people's stories? Partition happened to me. Partition happened to my dad. Because it happened to my dad, it happened to me. It happened to Bol Tayaji, Vimal Chachaji, Asha Puaji, Vadde Daddy. You know, it happened to all of them. It happened to, you know, Babiji. It happened to Bauji. It happened to all of them. It happened to all, everyone. It happened to Sarup Chachaji. It happened to the Sanis. It happened to it happened to everyone. Where's my people's story? And you know what? I was in a safe space where I could do that. And that's why I think safe spaces for South Asian artists need to be happening. I didn't have to explain myself. I could have a rant. And what Jatinder provided me with was a safe space.
Oh,
This is the work I want to do. That's why I'm back in this industry. But it's like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear a white man took public money to commission another white man to write a play about two white men. I don't want to hear it. And I remember I just lost my rag. And then I'm looking at Trident Moon. And look, my voice goes gentle at this piece going, my God.
yeah, I can hear it in I can feel your heart.
To feel the story of women, the women, my women. I don't care, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, my women, my people. Partition happened because of a man drawing a line. But until then, Lahore, as my dad says, they all lived together. They all lived in peace.
I know.
They all turned on each other afterwards.
They did.
They all went together drinking and dancing in the gymkhanas and all. They were, and I just lost my rag.
Both our families went through,
And that's it. And so that's why I'm now adamant that my career is where it is now, which is developing people's stories without other people going, this is what you should be writing about because of your gender or your race or your religion or this or that. It's like, sweetheart, you write about what you want to write and you want to do it and I like it, I'll help you. And that's it.
I think you are an inspiration because you are doing this and you are providing, I get the feeling, providing what you needed when you were young to the younger people coming into the industry now.
But I've always said that. That's what Tea with Tara was about. I wanted to provide something that I wish was around. I know that I felt, and I was able to say this to Jacinda, I felt very invisible. It was what someone said at Tea for Tara, which is I felt very invisible to even the South Asian theatre companies.
Yes, I remember that comment.
And it's very important that I turn around to all the young ones and say, you're not invisible, not to me. So when I see anyone do a really good monologue, I always type underneath and go, hi, really good monologue, really love it. So they know that someone's watching. And so it's important for them not to be invisible. And that's the one thing I'm going to do.
Yeah, because as we know from some of the younger people in the group, to have us to talk to as kind of people who have had sort of 15, 16 years already in the industry has meant for them, it's given them a kind of a lifeline, hasn't it? A creative lifeline that they wouldn't have had if lockdown hadn't have happened. It's remarkable. And I think I think let's just very quickly speak before we get to questions a bit more about safe spaces. And you mentioned about the fact that you had the safe space with Jatinder, which is great. He's a wonderful man. And now you've created
it's a shame he went, but he gave me such a safe space, and that's one of my work here will be a legacy to what he gave me, which was a safe space.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. And I think, we've both had that with different people in different companies over the years, and I certainly feel grateful.
You had it with Christine, didn't you?
I did, with Christine Landers Smith, who was the one of the founders with Sudha Butcher of Tamasha. I mean, she has literally changed my life. The Burgundy book is happening because of her, and I couldn't be more grateful to her for her support, her friendship, all of it. And so can we talk a little bit, just very quickly before we get to questions, because we've got so many people itching
we might end up going over an hour and a half. But
I know, we can.
Just to let everyone know, if we don't get to your questions, what has been proposed is later in the month, we're going to do a Twitter hour, so then we can answer your questions there. So if we don't get to your questions, my apologies. We said, hour and a half's a lot. We'll be done in 40 minutes.
Yeah, so I've just been texting Ruby, and we can go till 7:45. Okay,
that's fine. So let's have another quick chat, and then we'll see. We'll get.
I just want to quickly ask you about safe spaces, actually, just very quickly, because we haven't spoken about Tea with Tara very much, and I just think it'd be nice to do that for anyone who's listening that maybe doesn't know about Tea with Tara, or who maybe is very young in the industry and doesn't have a feeling of camaraderie with any other South Asian artists. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about the wonderful thing that you created 4 months ago called Tea with Tara.
And it was not just myself, it was the team, and I am going to say the whole team. And the way we work is it doesn't matter who comes with the idea. It's a bit like a story writer's room where someone throws an idea on the table and we take it and we flesh it out. And so how Tea with Tara came about was when lockdown happened, I felt so lost. I felt like the rug had been taken from beneath me. I was sat one Thursday and we were all at role play at King's, because a lot of us do medical role play and corporate role play, and all our phones went ping, 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 role play cancelled, role play cancelled. And in one day I lost over £2,000 worth of work.
I was at the Raw Free, same.
Yeah, and you know when you're like, no, it wasn't. It was a Friday. It was the 13th of March, and that was the day Equity, our lovely union, settled with Lawrence Fox. You know, we all sat there losing our jobs, and they settled. And I just want to get that in, and I always get that in, and I don't care because I think it needs to be said. And so over the following week, I know a lot of people were like, what we're going to do. Spending hours on the phone, figuring out whether we're in touch or anything. Tara came through for me, and I'm going to give them their dues. They came through for me and said, you know, we'll carry on with you. It's fine. And, you know, so I thought, okay, I've got a day a week here. Doesn't cover anything, but at least I'll be able to feed myself. You know, and of course, all friends turn around and say to you, oh, it's fine. You won't starve. Don't worry. What's your rent? We'll cover, you know. You get it, it's fine. And worst case scenario, I come home to my mum, it's fine, you know. So it was really quite scary. It was scary that suddenly, when I thought I would self-isolate, I thought I'd isolate with my mum. But overnight they went, no, you can't go. And you know, when you're like, but I'm in South Norwood, my mum's in Hounslow. What? And then suddenly everyone's throwing these monologue competitions, and I'm not having a go at, you know, BBC, I'm not having a go at Papa Tango, no one, you know, they were right, because for some people it was a lifeline, but it wasn't a lifeline for me. And I felt there was this uber pressure to be uber productive and be writing your monologue and doing this and doing that and doing the other and write your book and write War and Peace and do this and do that. And, you know, there was all these competitions about tell us your lockdown stories. Okay, well, this is only day one of my trauma. I don't have a story to tell. But what I felt really fundamentally was not no one was looking. There seemed to be a lack of looking at mental health. And so what Tara was about it wasn't about South Asian network creatives doing this, creating work. It was just a space for mental health. So all come together and talk about what you want to talk about, what you don't want to talk about the industry. And it became a very, very safe space, and it still is today, where people talk. This is how we met. And it became about people, and also on Autobiographical, people telling their stories in the industry, stories about what they're doing. And it's open to all, you know, it happens every Friday. Please come along. And that's what Tea with Tara was about. And it's been lovely because we've met so many amazing people. Yeah. And it's
we've connected.
Yeah, that's how we met.
Yeah.
So anyone who wants to come, please come along. Just email Tara Arts, and they will send you the invite, or email me, Anjali at tara-arts.com, and come along. So, okay, should we start?
Right, shall we get to some questions? There's quite a lot here.
Yes.
They have been, oh look, there's a wonderful comment from Ruby Kitchen. Tea with Tara has been and is amazing. A weekly inspiration and lifeline. Thanks, Ruby.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so should we just start from the top and go down? I think that's
we can just
fair.
read one each, and either of us can maybe respond.
Yeah. Okay. So hi there. Thank you for this discussion. Really enjoying it, and can listen to you both all day. My question is, how can we express our authentic stories and still be individual, e.g. finding the right mix of honouring your ethnicity and cultural background without, as Renu put it, her pieces bringing in it too much? Thank you.
Can you repeat that, because I haven't got that? I've been sent the questions by Ruby and that isn't there.
This is on the Q&A on the, because I'm host, isn't it? So basically, I'll say it again, but I'll paraphrase. Question is, how can you express your authentic story and still be an individual? So finding the right mix of honouring your ethnicity and your cultural background without, as you put it, bringing it too much into your piece.
So do you mean bringing too much of a cultural background into your
Yes.
piece? Yeah, okay. So I think that's a question that you have to ask yourself. How much of the story relies heavily on the cultural background? I think that's a question that you have to answer, because for me personally, the accident, yeah, the background, my cultural heritage is a backdrop to everything that happens to me. But it didn't influence what happened, and it certainly didn't influence how, because I live independently. Obviously, I don't live with my family, although they're wonderful. It didn't influence how I chose to process it at all. So I think it's very much dependent upon how much of the cultural background is intertwined in the story. Some stories, maybe familial stories, have more of a cultural element and have more of an intertwined element of the cultural background than others. So I think you have to think to yourself, what's the story I want to tell? Why do I want to tell this story? And why do I want to tell it now in the world? Is there a personal, political reason? Who are my audience? And I had one more thing I was going to say, and it's completely gone from my memory.
I get stuff
yeah,
like
so
that.
what's the why of the story? What's the why? Once you've found the why you're telling the story, then you can angle the story in a way that makes sense for you. And you might find that once you're angling it and you're finding the different facets to tell the story from, you might find the cultural element has more of a weight in the story than if you hadn't done that. So do your homework, ask those questions, write from different angles, write from different windows, look at the story from different aspects of a story, whether it's from a different person or someone that you know, maybe somebody you see regularly on the street, maybe it's the shopkeeper that you go to. How might they see you if you've had an experience or a trauma, whatever that might be? So write from different angles, and when you've done that, you'll find naturally where the element of the culture comes in or not into your story. That's my sense. Was there a second part to the question that I've missed?
No, I don't think so. Let me go up. No, that's what. See, for me, with my work, I'm South Asian. That's it. That's a given. I'm South Asian. I'm Punjabi. I'm a Londoner. I'm an East Londoner by birth. So it's in every day. Now, when you mean, when we put, so it's, for me, it's every day. It's the everydayness. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be like, again, all the stories I have, and I really do sometimes think people are going to think I'm making it up. But I had an audition for a continuous TV drama. A hospital drama, so it's continuous hospital drama. We only have a handful, so guess which ones it was. And the storyline was that the character had a heart condition and had been advised not to get herself pregnant because her heart probably couldn't cope. So, but what she had done is gone and got herself secretly pregnant behind her husband's back. So to me, that brought up so many stories of trust issues, someone deciding the future of this couple by herself. If she had died in childbirth, the husband would have been left with a baby and widowed, but hadn't been asked, probably would have wanted the wife and not the child. All of this came up with me, and I went going, right, as a human being, how would I feel? My partner at the time, how would they feel? All of this went in, and I went in, and then you read the script and it's like, but in our community, I need to give you a son. Oh, what will your parents think? Oh, the husband's brown. Oh, so he's slightly aggressive. Oh, and more high pitched as you go. And not just me, the other three actresses in the room, we all just went,
oh God,
flying fish. You know which word I'm using. And so when you look at that was bringing culture into it, where actually it wasn't just two Asians who can have a conversation about trust and babies and what's happening. And so for me, I am South Asian. I don't want to be anything else. Why would I want to be? I am who I am. Now, I can have an accident and it's not being anything to do with being South Asian, as what happened to you. I can get an illness. I can have something that's not South Asian, but the everyday part of my life. So if I was to film something, say a character, she was coming home to her mum, the language is Punjabi. It's more likely I would be sitting down to roti and dal. It's the backdrop. It doesn't have to be the story, but definitely the backdrop. And that's, for me, when I'm writing about my stuff, I'm writing about things that are happening to me, but the backdrop will always be South Asian because that's what it is. I sit in her home. You can smell it now. You know, my mum's made sabji and roti. She's got kheer on the go. I can hear her speaking Punjabi. She's got her dramas on TV, you know, which I'm missing, you know, because I've got into watching her. You know, we've got them next door. It's just the backdrop South Asian. My mum went earlier on to Sira Superstores because she needed to get healthy, you know, so all of that will be the backdrop. But the main story is we are capable of tripping over on the street. We're capable of falling down the stairs and breaking our leg. All of that. And that's the difference where, for me, the backdrop South Asian, but the story is just a human story.
Exactly. That's I think we're both saying similar things. And I think just to add to that, if I may, I think I missed the word authentic. I think the question was something about how do you bring your authenticity in. So just to kind of very quickly go back to that, my sense is that, and my experience is that, authenticity means different things to different people. So for me, it might mean talking from my heart and talking from my feelings, whilst also putting a specific stance on it. It might mean a different thing to you. So you have to decide, what does authenticity mean to you? And how much of that is entwined with your cultural heritage.
Yeah. So I'm taking pictures of the questions so we can answer them later on. Only you and me on screen. Okay. Yes, I've taken screenshots.
Have you seen there's a question from Ruby that's come through?
Oh, please,
Ruby.
come on then.
There is a question that's just come through, and she's asked, is there a difference to the appeal of male or female as stories to the audiences or theatre companies? So I think she's saying, do say, Ruby, if we're getting this wrong, do the theatre companies favour male or female stories?
I mean, at the moment, for me, I'm not favouring anyone. A good story is a good story, but I rarely get men approaching and saying, I want to tell a story.
Yeah, we can talk about tomorrow more.
It's all women. Yeah. So right now, if a man came along, I'd be definitely interested to mix things up. But if their story's no good, or if it doesn't have legs, it's not going to run, then there's not a lot I can do with that. You can't turn a non-story into a story, no matter how good you are. Yeah. But right now, would I actively be interested in brown male voices? Absolutely. Am I getting them? No. I put shout outs out, I don't get them, but I get lots from women. So so in questions of that, am I do theatres favour? I don't know, because Tara's it's my first theatre working in-house, so I can't speak for other theatres.
I think it depends upon who the people running the theatres are, their gender as well.
But I know for me, I know that I wouldn't favour a man because he's a man, but certainly to mix things up in terms of all the short stories we're developing, to perhaps maybe put them online or put them do a night of them. I would love some more men. So yes, at the moment, you could accuse me of wanting to favour men.
To balance out.
It's a balance. You rarely get, when you get people phoning up going, I've got an idea, it's a solo show, it's more women than men. I don't hardly have any stories from men.
Yeah.
And I put the call out, they don't respond.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting topic in itself, actually. Maybe we can talk more about this tomorrow in terms of men feeling afraid to bear their trauma or to write about it. There's a few more questions here. Actually, I've got 4 here that Ruby from South Asian Heritage Month has sent us.
Oh, brilliant.
And I'll just read one of them out to you, and maybe we can have a discussion, and maybe you can read one of the next ones. How can we get through to gatekeepers who just put on one piece of South Asian work and think they're done? When can we get our work? Where then can we get our work when doors aren't open for us? From Sanjay.
Sanj, sweetheart, this is a discussion that's been had again and again. I would at some point go over to Nikhil Shukla's tweet, if any of you are on Twitter, and read this is something that has been discussed. It's not a recent discussion. We were having it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's happening at the moment. I'm looking at people who I admire. I would love to have the writing CV they have. And when they write and say they have been actively told by a commissioner or a publisher or a theatre director, they've been actively told, oh, sorry, we've got our South Asian piece for the year, for the season. We're not looking for anything more. When people that I admire who have incredible CVs that you think would open doors are being told that, You know, and they're still asking the question. No one knows the answer. No, well, the answer is you move them and you replace them with people like Salima Khanum.
Which is what the article that we've both read talked about, didn't it?
Yes, that's what we were going to talk about, and I had it up here. Where have I put it? Do you know what? I want a computer with a big screen so I can like have 20 pages open at the same time.
You need a massive desktop.
Yeah. If someone wants to gift me $3,000, I want to buy one. I did write the name. There was an article in The Guardian, and it was Tabusum Begum, off the top of my head. And if I get that name wrong, I'm so sorry, because I'm remembering it, so I apologise. She wrote an article in The Guardian, and it was opinions in The Guardian. So it was the opinions piece. It was the opinions column about her experience in the writers' room, because she got selected to be one of the people that were trained up through an emerging writers program in a trainee room. And having been in one of those situations, I can categorically say there was nothing in that story that came as a surprise. There was nothing that came as a surprise to anybody. Everything she said is completely true to my experience. And what this takes is for people, the people that are in charge of these soaps, these stories, to come forward and go, this will never happen again. And so we know what happens. The people at the top need to change.
Yes.
I sent it to everyone, and they sent it back with horrific. It took Salima Khanum to read it and went, yeah, I'm taking this forward. This is a really good piece. She saw it for what it was. You need people with the same cultural kind of grounding as you to see your work rather than question your work. And we are questioned. This was one of the questions I was going to ask you, which was, it's gone. Yeah. Are we trusted to tell our own stories? If not, why not? You know, so I'm sending the Dateless Wonder out. A load of white people didn't trust me to tell my own story, but Salima Khanum came along and did. Now, if that isn't a template of what needs to happen, then what is?
Here, 100%, 100%. So, should we get to one of our next questions?
Let's get to one of our next questions.
Okay.
Let's go. Shall I do one?
Sure, go for it.
One's from Harkirat Asi. Hello. She's I know her, and she's a DJ for one of the Punjabi radio stations in Southall. So her question is, she's really, really amazing. Hope she's still there. Do you think
she is? She said hello.
Oh, hi baby, how are you? Do you think we sometimes censor ourselves for the fear of, or for the sake of our community, be it South Asian women or a combination? I say yes, sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. Now, there's a podcast out there at the moment called Brown Girls Do It Too. And it's about 3 South Asian, brown girls talking about sex, their sexual history, everyone. We have Sangeeta, who's part of Soul Sutras, doing the Masala monologues. So if we're looking maybe a decade ago, probably a lot of women did feel censored, or men felt censored, because their relatives were going to come and see their pieces. But I'd say now, less and less. You know, I'd say less and less is happening. I find a lot more work that's a lot more honest about feelings, sexuality, sensuality, about your sexual preference, being straight. I think there's a lot more honesty in plays. And is that because of people are feeling censored, or just the climate has changed? I don't know. I'd love to look that question up and and ask people and come back with a question, because all I can do is give you my opinion. You know,
and I think it also,
but I think less and less. But I'd love to look that up and come back to you with an answer when we do Twitter hour. I'd love to come back with an answer.
Yeah, likewise. Sorry to cut you off, Anjali. Let's do this. I think I would agree with you, and I think it also depends upon the context of the question, whether you're talking about do we censor ourselves when we're writing, or do we censor ourselves when we're talking? I mean, I think it depends. You know, I've certainly read a lot of information by memoirists that have talked about when you write a memoir, how much of the kind of the baggage about the culture do you want to bring in, and what is the purpose for bringing it in? Because you don't want to write a memoir to get back at somebody. You don't want to write a memoir with anger.
But the thing is, my culture isn't baggage. I mean, the way I wrote The Dateless Wonder, Dad is The Diary of Ria Mera. My culture didn't come as baggage.
Not you, not at all. And this wasn't from a South Asian writer. This was this was just research that I was doing a while ago when I was kind of researching stuff for something that I'm doing. And I was just reading other memoirists, even, people like Elizabeth Gilbert, who I very much enjoy listening to her podcast and her work. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. They're not necessarily South Asian, but they've talked about this because they get asked the very same question a huge amount. And I remember Elizabeth Gilbert saying when she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, some of the people who were in it obviously got written out by the time it went to print, because she wrote what was in her heart because she felt like she wanted to, and every time she edited it got diluted and diluted and diluted till she was happy with the artistic product that it became. So the first draft was not an artistic product, it was her going there. And the final draft was the artistic product.
Which is what sometimes you have to do. But HK's carried on with a really great point. Maybe this is a talk for another time. And she went, hello, I find with the influx of new Indian immigrants, we've gone backwards. But then what I'm really interested in, Harkat, is you're a DJ on a radio station, Southall. Is that what you find from people ringing in to your... do people ring in and say things? So that's actually a conversation for another time. Because she says, with new Indian immigrants, we've gone backwards. What I say,
what does she mean by backwards?
We've gone forwards.
But in what sense have we gone backwards? Maybe, sorry, I'm saying your name incorrectly. Harkirat, please, can you, in the chat, maybe elaborate?
Yeah, because that's a really interesting chat for another time.
It is, very much so.
Because when I'm looking at the way the podcasts are working, Soul Sutras, Brown Girls Do It Too, like all of this stuff, I'm finding, even some of the work Sanjay's doing, who's, one of the attendees, I feel that it's a lot more honest than it was maybe 10 years ago. I think there's a lot more freedom to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I had a really interesting conversation as part of my research for the interview on the BBC Asian Network on Tuesday with a dear friend of mine who's a musician and doctor. And so we had a conversation this morning. He's South Asian too, like us. And I wanted to speak to him about trauma in the Asian community. And he said a lot of the stuff that, we've talked about and we know in our generation and below, there's much more open conversations because we have the language and we have the dialogue to express how we're feeling about certain things, whereas our parents' generation don't have that language. There isn't a word for depression in our languages. There just isn't a word. So, somebody can't go to their GP and explain their symptoms because there's no context for that. They wouldn't even know what to start. So they wouldn't even think, I have a symptom. They'll just be thinking, so maybe they wouldn't be thinking at all. Whereas we have so much language around it. We have so much understanding around it.
Hilka's come back. She went, I work in arts management too. Sorry, I didn't realise you worked in too. It's the issues that are being discussed. People are challenging the British Asian perspective. I don't know. I think this is I want to come back to this when we do Twitter Hour because I think that's a really important question and I think it deserves time and space for us to answer it correctly. So, I'll get in touch with afterwards, just so I think that's a really important question. I really do. Let's go to one more. We've only got 2 minutes. We can't because this is going to cut off. So we're going to be back here tomorrow doing part 2, and we're going to talk about trauma, and we're going to talk about using trauma to create work. So Renu will be talking from her own point of view for her own work. I'm going to be talking about it from a dramaturgy point of view, because when people write their own work, I'm let into their trauma. So they're the 2 parts. So please join us tomorrow, and please do come with lots of questions again.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, South Asian Heritage Month, for curating this brilliant platform and for hosting us.